Hello, thank you for joining us for this virtual program, In Conversation, Jay Carlon and Joshua Oduga. I'm Joshua Oduga, Public Programs and Exhibitions Manager at Art and Practice, and we're very excited to share this virtual program with you. This program is organized in association with Art and Practice's current exhibition, Blondell Cummings, Dance as Moving Pictures, a co-presentation with the Getty Research Institute. The exhibition is on view until February 2022. For this program, we welcome movement artist Jay Carlon for an intimate conversation around his work and practice. Jay Carlon is a contemporary movement artist based in Los Angeles and New York City, whose highly physical work is centered in experimental, site-sensitive performance. Born and raised on California's Central Coast, Carlon's work is inspired by his background as a competitive wrestler while growing up the youngest of 12 in a Filipino, Catholic, and agricultural migrant working family. Hey, Jay.
How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Thank you for joining me today for this program. Very excited to be back in this space and be doing this program with you in person. It's a little bit unique, so I want to kind of start it off by handing it over to you for you to give us context about what we're about to do.
Yeah, for sure. I have a lumpia wrapper right here. Lumpia is like a Filipino egg roll. And I'm really interested in bringing food and decolonized practices surrounding foodways into my creative practice as a performing artist. And if I'm going to be a Filipino organizer, there better be food at that event. Any kind of POC would probably argue like that if there's going to be a family gathering, there better be food.
Yeah, there better be food.
So I'm here to feed you lumpia. But I think before I get started, I want to take a moment to kind of invite the ancestors into this talk. One of which is my dad. My dad's name is Honorio S. Carlon. He was born in 1912, which means we have a very old dad. But he immigrated here in 1932 and worked in the strawberry fields, tending to the agricultural landscape of America.
Yeah.
Mainly picking strawberries for over 50 years. And there's something about his story that is often undertold and erased. And that's that the Filipino migrant workers actually kind of convinced Cesar Chavez to start the strike, the grape strike. And so I feel like it's really important to, and it's, as we're filming this, it's October, and it's about Filipino American History Month. And so I just want to, bring awareness to my dad, most importantly, but also all the other Filipino Americans that have paved the way for me, in solidarity with other people of color surrounding that time in America. And I also want to acknowledge Blondell Cummings as someone that we should probably bring to this space too, as a unique ancestor. I like to bring in my artistic ancestors into this space. Like Audre Lorde. I always invite Audre Lorde into the space. And now recently, because I've actually just become acquainted with Blondell Cummings' work. And so thank you for inviting me to kind of be in conversation in parallel.
Definitely. I think that was a really important thing for me, having followed your work for so long and working on this exhibition for 2 years. When it came to the point when we started thinking about programs, you were the first person that I thought to do something like this. And I think because of the way that you hold space in your performance, I think, and all of that. And you really just beautifully kind of gotten us to one of the first things I wanted to talk about, the origins of your practice. I think growing up in a family of 12, and you probably had so much going on. So I imagine that a lot of it started in the home as well. So I want to talk about not only your origins of practice that may be, academic or professional, but I'd love to talk about like the really early onset when you knew that you were going to be thinking about movement as something in your life.
Great. Well, actually, before I hop into that, I'm going to give you a little task.
Okay,
So,
cool.
this is a lumpia wrapper or a noodle wrapper made out of rice paper.
Yeah.
So just like individually, slowly kind of tear them away. Yeah.
Okay.
I like to think of this as like in Filipino, it's called chismis, gossip.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's how all these stories, oral tradition get told, and how, and the best way to do it is like at the dinner table, judging each other for how tight their lumpia is. Or
right. I was watching you do this before, and I was like, he's gonna ask me to do that. I'm gonna have to do it the right way.
Yeah. So to go back to your question about the origin story. It's funny, I often go, when I talk about myself, I often go straight to my dad.
Yeah.
I go to lineage, I go to legacy. And for me, as a Filipino American, I feel like I'm constantly holding two very opposing parts of my identity going. And so let me take a step back. I started wrestling at the age of 4 years old because all my brothers did it. So it was really just like I did it because my brothers did it.
Yeah.
I didn't even exactly like it. But when I learned from wrestling is I learned at a very young age how to manipulate energy, how to use force.
That's what it's all about in a sense, right?
Yeah. How to use momentum and balance and shifting weight. And I feel like that is when I started my dance training. I also did tinikling, which is like it's like these long bamboo poles.
Okay.
That it's like sometimes it's called Chinese jump rope, but it's like long bamboo poles. It's kind of like the Filipino folk, the national folk dance of the Philippines. And so we would I would dance in between these bamboo poles, and that was, I kind of had a dance experience as a child. But then I didn't start training until college, and I feel like actually, a funny story about this is I was a architect major.
Oh, wow.
And then I graduated high school early. So actually, I'm gonna talk about these.
Yeah, go ahead. We can kind of talk.
Yeah. I graduated high school early because, just because I was kind of an Asian overachiever.
Yeah, definitely.
And I was taking classes at the community college, and then I had a big break during my MBA. And I was like, I took a dance class, and then, all of a sudden that one class turned into taking a jazz class, taking a modern class, taking a ballet class. And I was like, wow, I'm really falling in love with the energy that my body has, and I can channel it into a different process.
The physicality.
The physicality, like going back to my wrestling background, I was able to use that, channel that. But then, I also, as an architect major, I didn't see that much of a difference in my practice. Actually, it's just take one. Yeah. A lot has happened throughout my career. Went to UC Irvine for undergrad, went to Cal State Long Beach for graduate school. So Southern California is like my home. Yeah. I'm from the Santa Barbara County.
And those are two very different places of Southern California.
All SoCal. So I'm a SoCal girl, But I didn't see a difference between, I saw architecture needs bodies in space, otherwise there's no culture to the architecture, there's no life. And I feel like the dance, the body, the human form activates architecture.
It definitely does.
Yeah. And so to me, it didn't seem like a big shift in my changing career.
You definitely see that.
Yeah. So that's, I would say that I don't know, that's my origin story.
Yeah, I love that, especially because I think most people think of origins of dancers and they may think of them studying at a really young age. So I love the fact that you were doing wrestling, which is another physical thing, and I think it also has to do a lot with body awareness, which is what I think about when I think of dancers as well. I think the progression of that is really interesting. And one of the things I wanted to talk about, kind of following up from that, is when you started to engage in that in college, were there any like references or any like things that you started to see that really made you think about dance on a deeper level, like works that stuck with you or experiences that you might have had, readings, things like that?
So my mentor in at UC Irvine. Oh yeah. So here, so get a spoonful, and then So I like to put the square like a point towards me, and then at the lower bottom third, you're just going to put a little bit, down there, and then it's all shaped. And this is jackfruit that I made. It's a jackfruit carnitas. And I'll talk a little bit more about this dish in a bit. But
I watched you do it.
So you have a little bit like this, and then you just roll it like a little bit, and then you fold in the corners. Yeah, and then the important part right here is you have to keep pulling it in and tucking it. Almost like if you had to like roll a sleeping bag, you have to keep tugging it. Or if you ever wrestle, the wrestling bag, you have to keep tugging the sleeping bag. Actually, I think of the wrestling mat as a big lumpia wrapper. But to go back to your question, what works? So Yvonne Rainer, who is postmodern, one of the family, founding mothers of kind of pedestrian movement in a lot of modern dance forms. She was my mentor at UC Irvine. And she has this big manifesto called the No Manifesto, which essentially is like no to spectacle, no to all the no's are escaping me right now, but like no to representation, or a lot of like no to the standards of what traditional performance is. And so, I have her like in my back of my mind as a creating all the time. And then I also started dancing around the first season of So You Can Dance, right? So that's kind of when I started like actively training. And so I kind of fell in love with that spectacle to kind of contrast the no spectacle. And then in the other corner of my mind, I have my mom, who I'm like, I always want my mom, this Filipino immigrant mother. Yvonne Rainer, this like dance scholar and postmodernist performance maker, and the commercial So You Can Dance world. To kind of, I don't necessarily need them to love my work. I just want them to be like in the audience, kind of be like, okay, that has a place here.
I feel like that's really important. One of the things I've learned working on this exhibition, thinking about Bell's work, is how much dancers, more than other artists, need to make a place for them. How much often that is the thing. So I think it's really interesting studying with a person like Yvonne Rainer and having that influence happen really early in your studies, because that had to affect how you think about your work and how it's seen in the world. And those are not too good.
It's fine. It's okay. My mom was here. She would she would put those in the trash. But I appreciate that, and we're gonna get better. So
that's the point. Right? I hope by the end of this I'm really great. But what I was saying is that I think that takes me to then when you started making work on your own, right? When you started thinking about all the knowledge that you had acquired, and then thinking about being a person that's creating work as well. This idea of like spectacle versus non-spectacle and all of these things had to be really guiding your principles when you were creating work. And one of the things that really strikes me about your work, and at least the works that I first encountered was this idea of like site specificity and being in certain spaces and thinking about the space as being equally a tool in the work as the work itself, right? And so I wanted to spend some time talking about that and how that became a thing.
Yeah, the origin story of site in my work is, how do I talk about this? So I was living in New York, so once I finished grad school, I went from undergrad to grad school right away, so by the time I was 25, I had just been like 8 years of college. And, for dancing, I think it really needs an outside experience. And so I moved to New York and kind of was like, wow, I wish I knew that there was, I didn't know that you can make dance outside of the theater. I mean, I knew you could, but I always just had these ideas that it was like white women frolicking in the park or something.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that, but I didn't see myself in that. And so, anyway, I was dancing in New York, and I couldn't see an entry point at that point in my career to choreograph because it just seemed like so expensive. Also, such a big institution. So after I was finished my contract at the Metropolitan Opera, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to LA and become like an urban gardener and not dance anymore. I'm over it.
Yeah.
And somehow I ended up being a part of an organization called Home LA, which does public performances and private residencies. And I've been working with them since 2016. I did a performance on the side of a hill, which we could link to. Yeah, it's called Raked, and it was in the area in northeast LA called El Sereno. And I fell in love. I was like, I felt actually in the studio and in the theater that those spaces didn't reflect me or my people. I still love the theater, I still love the gallery space, but it was feeling really sterile at that time in my life.
Yeah.
And so I started to fall in love, and I created a work in a parking lot where I was like, I honestly was just rehearsing, and I was like, you know what, I really don't want to be in the studio, let's go outside, and we made a piece in the parking lot. And then so I started to really fall in love with being outside. It made me think I was also closer to, my parents were migrant workers. So I really wanted, I'm a tourist, I'm a nerd in science, I'm like, yeah, my hands dirty. Like the colonized person in me equates labor to good work.
Yeah.
The more I'm sweating, the harder I exert effort, the better this piece is. But so I kind of just started falling in love with site, and then I started thinking about access. And so if I keep doing public works, then I get passersby. I perform for not only the people that purchased tickets or donated or whatever, but also even the unhoused folks on the street, kind of like, what's happening right now?
Yeah.
So I love that. And so that's how sight became a character within my work.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting. Going back to the idea of spectacle versus not spectacle, one of the things I always think about when people are making any kind of site-specific work, whether it's dance or anything like that, is the level of control that you give up to the public and all of those things, and how quickly performance in a site-specific place can be perceived as spectacle, even if that's not the intention.
Yeah.
And so one of the works that I wanted to talk about, and we'll link everything that we'll talk about in this conversation at the bottom of our practices program page, so you can explore the works on your own, was the work Baggage. I wanted to talk about that work because that was a work that I got to experience in person. It's when I saw, what was happening, and I think everything that was happening in that space. So I wanted to talk about that.
Yeah. So Baggage, I really kind of love creating spaces that are liminal, can be working in liminal spaces or transitory spaces. train stations, shores. I haven't done this, but I would love to create a work in an airport hangar, or ports. I'm working on creating a work at a port right now. Hopefully, we get the grant. But thinking about these spaces of migration. So when Metro Arts asked me to create a work at Union Station, I was like, this is perfect because they call that the Ellis Island of the West.
Yeah.
So just thinking about the people that passed through that. So when I was creating the work, I was thinking about what happens in these spaces, and then I saw the baggage claim. I was thinking about, and I've been kind of since the beginning of the pandemic thinking a lot about intergenerational trauma and trying to heal myself, my own intergenerational traumas, but also maybe healing my mom's traumas, and my ancestors, and my unborn lineage. So when I started workshopping baggage, I started literally use bags. I was thinking about rope and thinking about vectors of identity, and intersections of different cultures and pathways. And so I made this piece, and then I really wanted to use a soundscape that reflected the communities that Union Station serves. And there's a lot of immigrant communities that pass through there. So I used my mom's. I used an interview that I did with my mom, where in the interview she talks about it's just us and her sons, me and my brothers and my mom, and an interviewer from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo that was collecting stories about Filipino migrant families on the Central Coast. And they asked me, and she was asking my mom about her marriage, and my mom was 19 and my dad was 59 when they got married, and so, very, very young mother, very older dad. And I never, Filipinos don't really talk about they have a lot of repressed emotions that they don't articulate, especially through words. And so I found out in that interview that it was somewhat of an arranged marriage to kind of send money back to the Philippines. So she would get married, make American money, and then eventually send money back to the Philippines. So my family, my Lola, my grandma in the Philippines can make a living. And so I don't know, this is ironic, probably not the right word, but when I was filming this, my Lola actually passed away. And so I started to realize that, and when my Lola passed away, I noticed my mom's kind of purpose in this country started to feel, she was like, whoa, I came here to send money back. Do I keep sending money back? There's so, and this is a deep colonial trauma for the Philippines. The country's been colonized for over 400 years, so they've never really established self-sustaining practices. So then they always go, oh, so that's why my dad came to America in the 30s to kind of live a better life. My mom, through this arranged marriage, came to America for a better life. And so here I am, this kind of privileged American, I feel I feel really sometimes guilty for being an artist. I'm like, oh, I know my mom wanted me to be like a doctor, or she really wanted me to be an architect.
Yeah.
I'm just an architect of the and so the reason I'm mentioning all this is because it's the intergenerational trauma, which is a book bag. I'm trying to literally unpack. We're all done with the meal, so great. Then we'll get to frying and taste it.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard that from a lot of first generation Americans and artists. I'm one of myself. I struggle with those things all the time, especially as I get older, thinking about what type of legacy I should leave behind. You know? And I think it's really interesting that you're making work to figure these things out.
Yeah. So this is a practice that I like to call, I call it chismes, which is gossip in Tagalog. And I like to kind of, the things my dad never told me, and I'm not going to be able to get them directly from him because he passed away 12 years ago. But I like to fill in the gaps. And he's a historical figure, Filipino American community, or like he was a part of that generation.
Yeah.
So through my work, I like to fill in the gaps. Yeah.
And it's constantly creating a form of conversation and collaboration in that sense as well, which is like another thing that I think I wanted to talk about in terms of your work is collaboration and how you collaborate with other individuals, how you collaborate in space, material, all of these things. What really strikes me about that is that it's clearly grounded in some form of personal research, right? Like whatever that might be. Is it, you participated in this archiving of stories with your family, and that becomes something that later on influences the work that you're making, or you're approached by an institution to work on a program like this, and you end up doing something like that, which I think is a way going back to your cultural history and also potentially looking towards things that you want to do in the future. Thinking about Blondell and thinking about her legacy and the way that she looked at collaboration and things like that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your personal philosophy about collaboration, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some of that.
So I'm just going to make sure the oil is fluttering out. Because we want to make sure that it's crisp to a golden hue. And I think I ordered it too. So collaboration. I like to think of Filipinos as great collaborators because we are so invested in community. We really, it takes a village. So I also think that I love collaboration because I don't like being alone.
Yeah.
I just don't like being alone. When I'm by myself, I'm like, the extrovert in me is like, I need to be around people. I'm the youngest of 12.
Yeah.
But collaboration, I love the spectacle. And I love sensation. So when I think about, especially if it's a site work, specific work, I like to think about the whole thing. So I focus on the body, but I don't necessarily know how to create a soundscape or music for this. So I would need a musician to kind of help. So I like to think of collaboration as a way to just kind of help create an environment.
Yeah, definitely. So for you, it's a lot about bringing in other people in to help fill out things or thinking about the space, which I think is really interesting. And it also speaks, I think, to some of the works that you make with other individuals, even though that's not a whole part of your practice. Being a person that at one time was leading a company and doing these sorts of things, and navigating that with collaborators, I'm sure is a little bit complicated, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's always, it's like a negotiation because I think there's a time, we're coming into a generation where it's very common for dancers to be expected to help generate material.
Yeah.
So there was a time in history when it was the choreographer came up with all the movement, and it was a single choreographer that was their voice and their vision. And they made a technique, and I don't know if that's so popular these days. And I don't have anything against that, but I much prefer to see what somebody else's body. I like watching people make choices, and so a lot of my work has improvisation. I'm trying to lean more into choreographing scores instead of choreographing phrase work. So I can see the individual whether it's an embodied dancer, or if it's a musician, or if it's even like a set design. I don't know how you improvise a set design, but like how that I'm really interested in like figuring out how each person can thrive within that.
It's really interesting because you say like set design, and like, I don't know how you think about set design. You do these videos as like dance film selfies, right?
Yeah.
All the time. I've seen so many of them, even in the recent past that you've been doing, right? And I think a lot about how where you're making it must come into play. And it's like this little snapshot of where you are as a person, just as much as it is a snapshot of the movements that you're making and these sorts of things. So I think even when I say collaboration, I'm thinking in a sense like it might just be you making the work, and you're thinking about the space that you're doing. You're thinking about how all of that is going to come across. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about is your work working in video and working as a choreographer, working in support of other people's visions, and like how you navigate that when you have such a strong basis in your cultural identity and all of the things that entails.
For film, yeah, I mean, I much prefer the live. Like I love energetic exchange between people in person, in especially after the pandemic. Make me do something in person. But with film, there's something that's really that you can do in film that's like it's a little more intimate. You can transport people more quickly that aren't like to places that you aren't actually in. And for film, I really like with dance film selfie. That project emerged out of me. I was traveling a lot, so I was touring with other dance artists, and I was craving a personal creative outlet.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to create a series of work. Like I really loved that like a lot of visual artists had series, and I'm like, why don't dancers have series? And so I started just like, it's like, well, if I just, it really started because I was stuck overnight in an airport in Russia, and so then I was like, I just recorded myself dancing.
Yeah, and we'll link that one.
Yeah, we'll dance.
Yeah, we'll link
dance from selfie. And I just kept doing it, and now I'm like, well, this is a lifelong project. So this is an archival. It's simple. It's my iPhone. It's put on the floor. It's meditative for me. It forces me to kind of go out on walks and like, explore some place that I would. Sometimes they're like really iconic sites, or like a backdrop, and sometimes it's like an alleyway somewhere. With film, I'm still exploring what that means. I want to do more film.
Yeah. One of the projects that I was really excited to see you work on, that I actually found out after we started talking about this, was your work working with mind design.
Yes, Rico.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'd love to talk a little bit about that.
This photo is not getting hot, but I am working on it. Okay. So actually Ringo is a friend of mine. So my design is a friend of mine. When Ringo asked me, he's like, I have this song, it's called Slow Dance, I really want dancers, but I was going to choreograph it, but I'm just not sure how to create that vibe, and I was like, I got you. I got you. Yeah. And so like the song is really about the lyric is like, if we slow dance, we can really take time to get to know each other. And so I was thinking about what the song was asking, and it wasn't asking for choreography. It was asking for a connection. It was asking for two people to come together and have a sensual experience to get to know each other.
Yeah.
And so when I was choreographing that, I kind of just created, again, like I said, I created this container for the dancers to thrive within it. Yeah. There's some set framework that we created. There's like an infinity sign. If you watch the video, there's like an infinity sign. That kind of was inspired by Alvin Ailey. Amazing words. But just trying to figure out ways to get the bodies to move together. And of all the music videos I worked on, like this mind design, slow dance music video is by far my favorite. Yeah, I'm sure that it has to do with a personal connection of you all being friends as well. But I think one of the things that I'm learning so much more about this conversation that we're having
is the way that you're using your work as a means of like problem solving in a way, right? Like really thinking about the task in front of you and using movement as a way to figure things out. I think, which is really interesting. And thinking about that, I wanted to talk a little bit about like this idea of like practices of care, like using your body, using movement, and all of these things. How do you then begin to think about all of this in a way that you're taking care of yourself as well? Because I think when I think about choreographers and dancers and moving people, like you said, oftentimes they're tasked with translating things. So you're brought into a project, and it's like they're putting so much on you. So I wanted to talk to you about how you go about taking care of your work and of yourself and all that.
I'm glad you're bringing this up because I've been doing a lot of active work in healing lately, and some of that involves meditation, breath work. But some of it also involves, and we talked about this earlier, like communing with ancestors, and just different, and developing boundaries or voicing boundaries. Something it's a practice I never had until very recently. That I'm like, okay, I can voice my boundaries. I can also ask that of all my collaborators. And then if I make sure that everyone is on the same page, everyone feels safe, everyone feels like they can thrive. Of course, I'm often the director, so I'm bringing everyone together, but I don't ever want it to feel like but they might lose their job. I've been in situations where I've been like, if I speak up, I don't do the job. Right? Okay, it's been hard. Sorry.
No, this one. That's fine.
But trust is a word that I really love to. Sorry, I'm just going to check on the turn it off. I like to think of trust as the thing that fuels my work. So trust with performer to performer. Yeah. Trust from performer to audience. Trust audience to performer. Trust performer to space. Audience to space. Space to ancestors. Ancestors to the performance. So trust is something that I'm constantly thinking about when I'm thinking about protocols of care.
Yeah, I feel like that's really cool. Especially when you're thinking a lot about the work that has to do with your personal identity. It's like you have to think about it. You have to think about you're bringing a lot of even your family's personal history sometimes into the work, even if it's nuanced in a way that doesn't translate exactly. It's like organizing all of that and then figuring out how to get the company together and rehearsals and all of that stuff can really be a lot. And now that we've talked about all this, let's figure out if we can get this right first.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is where you are now.
Where I'm at now. Yeah, it's funny. We've been talking about sight a lot, and I'm really craving to be in a theater right now, or like in a. I really want to work with technology and projection on this project. Where I said I'm a wrestler. Yeah. So I want to kind of create this solo where I'm wrestling a duet where I'm wrestling myself, but it's actually a solo. Yeah. So I feel like I need technology to help support this, whether it's motion capture or 3D mapping, or 3D scanning of my body. So I'm working on that solo right now. Yeah. But it's funny. It's probably my first theater. I'm thinking as a theater, as a site. Yeah. Yeah. Because I want a controlled setting. I want to go to blackout.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel there's a logical progression for all the things that you're doing. That now you want a little bit more control. That sounds great. Did it get to the correct?
Sure, what's going on? Let me just check this. It's overheating. Let's see if we need a pause or something. Yeah, so that's the work I'm working on right now, is this solo. and I really just want to kind of figure out a way to wrestle with myself. I think of my wrestling training as when I started dancing. Mm-hmm. But then, as a queer person, I always talk about wrestling and I tiptoe around the fact that it's homoerotic. And so I'm kind of wondering if there's a way that I can... I think this why I don't want to go into the homoerotics is because I'm kind of thinking about my mom watching my work, and I'm like thinking, I feel like a lot of Asian folks probably are nervous about experimental work when it comes to like accessibility. Yeah, and I want the work to maintain and to be accessible, but I also I'm curious in how I can be liberated in this practice. I don't know what's happening with this. Yeah, that's the solo that I'm trying to work on.
That sounds really great. It sounds like it's once again one of those things where you'll be setting forth a lot of different things, and you'll have like a research, a period where you'll have some problem solving. Yes. I'm really excited to see where you take that.
Yeah, I'm really excited to show it too. Let me check this. Sorry about that. I feel like it wasn't it just keeps stopping or something. Fingers crossed. This works. It'd be a disaster if we don't even try any of these.
I know. I'm looking forward to it. I think it will.
Yes. I'll just use this in it's not.
Yeah. Oh,
it's not like
you want it to be like that fries.
Yeah, fries. Yeah. So these are, I made this with jackfruit. It's called jackfruit carnitas. Yeah. And so something that I'm really inspired by is the Manila galleon. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's the trade route between Southeast Asia and Latin America. And essentially, it's Spanish conquistadors that would essentially, like through slaves, trade goods between the Philippines and Mexico. So the reason there is tamarind and coconut in Mexico is because it came from the Philippines. The reason there's corn and potatoes in the Philippines is because it came from Latin America.
Because you see lots of crossovers in the food. Itself not being from either culture, but having tons of friends and colleagues and acquaintances over the years. And you see lots of crossover in the food, and I think also in culture, in the philosophy, and thinking about family and things like that. It's really
when you get into indigenous culture and then you mix it with Catholicism and erasure, and then you think about survival. That's why these families stay close, and we also think about food. And so, in the Philippines, we have tamales in the Philippines.
Yeah. I've had it. It was really, really good. Banana leaf.
Yeah, with banana leaf. Yeah. So I've been, through my work as a community organizer, I've been thinking more about how I get into communities like this. And, then asking all these questions.
Yeah.
How, and the majority of my family, my favorite American tradition, the inspiration for this dish is, my favorite American tradition is on Christmas, my family would exchange lumpia with tamales with our neighbors.
Oh, wow.
So to me, that's the most American thing that I've ever done. And so this dish is kind of, fusion. I think fusion is like the other F word.
Yeah.
But fusion to kind of help me understand why, in California, Filipinos have such a kinship with our fellow Mexican neighbors.
Yeah, definitely. It's a thing that in my life, and it's really interesting. I think to sit here with you, a movement artist, to think about these things. It's something that I've thought about extensively throughout the years, but there hasn't really been a way for me to think about it on a deep level. And now that we're having this conversation that is seemingly about like your practice as a dancer, it is now telling me like you need to do more research about that, about the relationship, about the trade route that you're mentioning. And I think another thing that I'm learning about working on this exhibition and Rondell's work and engaging with your work and everybody else who's doing these programs is how much choreography and dance is like a vital way of telling stories and kind of cataloging these things and holding space for them over time, right? Like you see in Rondell's work at the exhibition, so many works about food and about how food affects different types of people, whether it is the construction worker or the African-American woman, all these different things. And so I think it's really interesting the way that dance and movement can talk about these really universal topics in such a beautiful way. And it can do it in a way that goes across cultures. I think food maybe is like one of the only other things that can do. Like, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, this keeps turning off, and I don't know why. But we're gonna at least get some.
Yeah, we'll get some.
Food is an embodied. You're inherently embodying as you're eating. You know, and I think of food not just from when it's on your plate in your mouth, but and not just from cutting it or picking it from the store, but like how it grew and who grew it and what weather conditions. So like I really like to think about digesting my food, going like not just when it enters my mouth, but like all the hands that touched it.
Yeah.
And I think of that as choreography. I also think, like a lot of like, Filipinos, a lot of people of color, Black people, like we are embodied people. We tell stories through song and dance. Yeah. And, and I think that's why Filipinos kind of gravitate so much towards Black culture.
Yeah.
Is because we're like, when we came to America, we're like, where are the embodied folks? And they're like, okay, here they are. And so the ways that we tell stories is through that. And food really is important to telling these stories.
So you're thinking that in a lot of different ways that the ideas of food will start to come into your practice even more. Right?
Oh yeah, I just started.
Yeah.
So this is actually one of my first. I did like another food event where I made this dish, and a lot of my community came out. They're like, "Are you dancing now? Are you going to be moving?" I was like, "Oh no, I made the food, and I'm thinking of that as choreography. But I'm not against dancing about food, and I do want to integrate food more. I'm just trying to think, and this is like during the pandemic, so I'm trying to figure out how food can be a part of my process a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with my love for sustainability, or I mentioned earlier about finding more sustainable practices in the Philippines, and more sustainable practices in terms of like healing. And to me, food is medicine.
Yeah. That's a part of it. Tell me, let's speak a little bit while we wait for the rest of this to fry. Have you worked in the Philippines? Have you done any work in the Philippines?
So I was just in the Philippines in February 2020.
Yeah.
And I gotta make sure this stays on.
The chef's in control.
I think we're gonna cook these all at this point.
I think we'll cook the rest after.
Yeah, sure.
We'll just have a little feast after the after.
Sorry, what was the question?
The question was about your work in the Philippines. Like, have you had a chance to work in the Philippines, stage work?
I've been trying to work more. Like, I taught a bunch of classes at my parents' high school.
Oh, wow.
So I just went to the high school. And this island that my family's from is called Cabilao. It's in between Cebu and Bohol, which is like in central Philippines. And it's 3 square miles. There's no running water on this island. They just got electricity. There's no roads. There's only motorbikes on this island. So if you can imagine, like, kind of, it's rough. But I went to my parents' high school, and then I asked if I could teach a class, and I taught their PE classes for the day. and it was lovely. And it was just so nice to kind of come into, to feel like I'm giving back.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of Filipinos that we send like buy-in boxes, these huge boxes of just like often old clothes and like spam. I don't know why, like.
Yeah, like to Nigeria, it's always like Fritos.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I'm just like, what? Why don't we just like, they have food there in the Philippines, why not? But, so I've been trying to figure out ways to have a better relationship to the Philippines rather than just sending money and, you know, and spam.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, given all the things that we've talked about today, that makes a lot of sense that you would be thinking about that, because you're essentially living a very embodied life where you're thinking about all of these things, and it would make sense that you would think in that manner. You know, we started off this by welcoming ancestors into this space and doing all of that. So in my mind, it's like, yeah, this is what he should be doing. So it makes so much sense. And I'm so excited to have done this with you. I'm really hoping that we can eat one of these now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I made a dipping sauce for this. This is mole that I got from Guadalajara. Do you know Guadalajara?
Yes, love it. It's one of my favorite places. Yeah.
If you're in LA, go to Guadalajara. They have great mole.
It's like the best mole that you can get.
Yeah.
Wow, we're doing it right.
Doing it right. So this is not mole dipping sauce, and the reason there's chocolate in the Philippines is because it came from Mexico.
Yeah.
So we actually have like mole dishes from the Philippines too.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a unique interplay between different cultures, and so part of me in choreographing this dish is imagining that I'm kind of getting to know my ancestry a little bit better simply by oh wait, hold on. Can I get one of those? You gotta make this look sensitive. One of the yeah. So this way. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that.
Yeah. Gotta get the presentation on lock. Everything.
There we go. Yeah, I feel like by creating this dish, it kind of helps me get to know the camera.
I'm gonna think.
Go ahead. Careful, it's hot. You need it. Mike.
Delicious.
Mike, he's on.
No,
Spit it. Yeah, so this dish is like not typically the dipping sauce. You know, usually it's like a garlic chili oil that they would use, but I was like, well, how can I try to use more of these flavors that are more unique to here? But you know, jackfruit grows wild in the Philippines, and so like I used canned jackfruit, but
you didn't even have to say that. Nobody would ever know.
I know. So let's cut that out.
But this is really amazing. I think one of the things is I've been in this space where we do these programs for about a year and a half. And when the founders of our program, I still think thinking about things like this, and thinking about people talking about their cultural history and talking about their artwork in concert with each other and feeling comfortable doing that. So one of the things I want to say is thank you for sharing your culture with me. Thank you for bringing the food in and feeling comfortable talking about your family and all of those things. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. Honored to be here.